we've reached the end of Wilds of Eldraine spoilers. We got all the rest of the rares and mythics and enchanted tales to talk about, and I gotta say, this set is looking pretty awesome. Hello everyone, it's Seth, probably better known as Saffron Olive, and it's time for a final daily dose of Wilds of Eldraine spoilers. So the full set is out. You can see it all, sort it, filter it over at MTGpreviews.com, but we still have some really neat stuff to talk about. We got the rest of the mythics and the rares and enchanted tales, some updates on the commander decks, so we actually got a bunch to talk about, which means we should probably jump right into it. But before we do, a couple of quick reminders. So of course, you can see the full set over at MTGpreviews.com. If you need any of these cards, you can snag them from our sponsor Card Kingdom over at cardkingdom.com/MTGGoldfish. And even though today is the last spoiler video for Wilds of Eldraine, there is still a ton of Wilds of Eldraine stuff to come. So next week we'll have some review videos talking about the best cards in the set for various formats. Next Thursday is the early access day over on Twitch. So come hang out, see all the new cards in action as we get a full stocked account from Wizards to use for that one day. And then of course, once the set drops, we'll have tons of gameplay content for all different formats, checking out all these sweet new cards. So anyway, everyone, thanks for watching this spoiler season. I hope you enjoyed it, and let's talk one last time about Wilds of Eldraine. So first up today, we got our final mythic, our green virtue in Virtue of Strength. So like the rest of this cycle, you get a cheap spell combined with a very expensive enchantment in this case. So the spell side guarantees growth, 1 green mana sorcery, return target creature land card from your graveyard to your hand. And then the enchantment side, 7 mana, if you tap a basic land for mana, it produces 3 times as much mana instead. So when I first saw this card, my initial impression was probably the weakest in the cycle, but this card can still do some ridiculous things, and I like the idea of this design. The more I've thought about it, I like what this card's trying to do. So if you think about Virtue of Strength, its spell side, it's a bad recollect style spell. Getting something back from your graveyard for 1 mana is nice. It is limited in that it's only creatures and lands, but at the same time, in 2023, in most decks, those are going to be your most important cards anyway. So it's kind of like a grapple with the past that doesn't mill, or a nature spiral that doesn't get artifacts or enchantments or planeswalkers, but still 1 mana, it doesn't get much cheaper than that. So I like that mode of the spell. The enchantment side, it's like a bad Nyxbloom Ancient. Nyxbloom Ancient, also 7 mana, but it triples your mana for any permanent that taps for mana. Virtue of Strength not only works for lands, but it only works specifically with basic lands, although it does have the upside that it's an enchantment, so it's going to be less likely to die than Nyxbloom Ancient. As someone who loves tripling things, I've built many Nyxbloom Ancient decks, and the problem with Nyxbloom Ancient is you like do all this work to get it on the battlefield, and you're like, oh my god, next time I'm going to untap, I'm going to have like 30 mana, I'm going to do the most ridiculous thing possible, and then your opponent just like Doomblades it and you cry. So I like that this is an enchantment, even if there is a pretty big restriction that you got to play a bunch of basics to make it work. The basic restriction is actually kind of unique. The only card I could find that's sort of similar is Gauntlet of Power, which lets you choose a color, and basic lands of that color double their mana, and that's 5 mana, although it was printed a decade ago, so a little power creep is probably in order. So the thing I like most about this card is it's another card that pushes you towards playing a monocolor deck in Commander. We were talking about this with Throne of Eldraine a couple days ago. Commander has devolved into 3 to 5 color soup. Like, it's very, very easy to just play all the best cards in a whole bunch of different colors, and a lot of Commander decks do that. I like that these cards kind of subtly push you towards, okay, maybe try a monocolor deck every once in a while. Virtue of Strength, not as glaring as Throne of Eldraine. Throne of Eldraine essentially says, like, please, please, please play monocolor. Virtue of Strength does it in a more sneaky way by making you play a lot of basic lands, and the way you can actually play a lot of basic lands is being monocolored. So I think this is mostly a card for mono green Commander decks, in really specific mono green Commander decks. If you're going to play this card, you want to be a mono green deck primarily, that's also a big mana deck. Probably the best home for this is Omnath Locust of Mana. Omnath just wants as much green mana as possible because it grows it and you get to save up your mana. Virtue of Strength seems perfect there because if you're playing mono green, you're probably going to be playing a ton of basic forests anyway. Vorinclex Vorinclex is another good option, likes big mana and even more mana production, plus your mono green. The only non-mono colored commander I could really find that I'd want to play this in is Faeille's World Sculptor, which is the only legend I'm pretty sure that specifically refers to basic lands. It makes plant tokens equal to the number of basic lands you control when it comes into play. So Faeille really pushes you towards playing a ton of basics anyway, so Virtue of Strength seems like an easy inclusion there. That said, I have found even in my mono-color decks, I often play a lot of non-basic lands these days. We keep getting more and more good utility lands, so if you look at some of my mono-green decks in like Commander Clash, there's a decent chance I'm gonna have 10, maybe in some cases 15 non-basic lands between like Boseijus and Castle Garenbriggs and Gaia's Cradle, Bladed Woodland, creature lands, all the MDFC lands, and we keep getting more and more of them. So I feel like this is, in a weird way, a card that's gonna get worse as the years go by, and we keep getting more and more utility lands, because I could certainly see a time in a few years where my mono green deck is playing like 10 basic forests and like 20 some non-basic lands. And if your deck's like that, then I think this really loses a lot of value. You really want this to be tripling up almost all of your lands for it to be worth it compared to the other options. There are some combos with this card similar to Nyxbloom Ancient. The only downside is they do make you play a whole bunch of basic lands and they are two colored, but like Palenkron Virtue of Strength, if you're playing a bunch of basic lands, is just 2-card infinite mana. Palenkron, 7 mana to cast. When it ETBs, you get to untap 7 lands and you pay 4 to bounce it back to your hand. So for a total of 11 mana, you can play and bounce Palenkron back to your hand. If you have 7 lands on the battlefield, and they're each tapping for 3 mana, you can tap them for 21 mana. So you play and bounce this for 11 and then do it again. You get all the extra mana floating, it stores up, eventually you use it for something and win the game. Same with like Temur Sabertooth bouncing Peregrine Drake. So there are synergies for it, although in many of these synergies, I wonder if Nyxbloom Ancient is just better. And I think that's the biggest question for this card. It's really competing with 2 other cards in my opinion. One is Nyxbloom Ancient, which we talked about before. It's just a better version of Virtue of Strength, but it's a creature so it dies a lot, which is the big drawback. But on the battlefield, it's like a Virtue of Strength that just works with everything. The other one it's really competing with is Zendikar Resurgent. Zendikar Resurgent only doubles up your mana, but it works on any lands, but it also draws you a card whenever you cast a creature spell. So it's going to be interesting to see how this shakes out. I think all these cards are strong, and maybe what it comes down to is what deck are you playing? Like, if you got a bunch of mana rocks in your deck that are making mana, Nyxbloom's probably better. If you're a very creature heavy deck, then even though it's not making as much mana, Zendikar Resurgent's probably better. But if you're that Omnath deck or that Vorinclex deck that's playing a ton of basic lands, or that Faeille deck, then maybe Virtue of Strength is the way to go. The other thing worth mentioning is just the spell mode is a really big deal. Even in Commander, sometimes Zendikar Resurgent just gets stuck in your hand, or Nyxbloom Ancient just gets stuck in your hand. Virtue of Strength in the early game, it gets back a fetch land, it gets back a creature that dies, it gets back your Solemn to ramp you again, your Sakura Tribe Elder to ramp you again. So don't underestimate the fact that this does do something early in the game, unlike the rest of these spells. As far as Standard is concerned, I think there's very specific decks that could make this work. I actually just earlier today was playing this weird mono green ramp deck that was trying to like win with Nissa after making a bunch of Awaken the Wood land tokens. Maybe it would tribute to the World Tree out to make the land tokens huge. That deck's playing like almost all basic forests anyway, and it wants a ton of mana. This seems like a nice addition there. Just play this and you are going to make so many Forest Dryad tokens with your Awaken the Woods and then easily cast your Nissa and win the game. The other possibility is there's some landfall decks that really like playing the bad Streets New Capenna fetch lands, because you have like Nissas and Teyovas, and the fetch lands, even though they're not great, they're not that bad. So I could imagine some deck that's mostly playing basics because they're trying to trigger landfall with these fetch lands and you need basics to tutor out. So then you eventually stick this and like triple up your mana. In triple mana, if you have 7 lands to cast, this does just make a lot of things lethal. Like if you have 7 lands, they each tap for 3 mana, you can Shiv and Devastator for 20 and have a 20/20 Flying Haster. You can Light Up the Night for 20 damage at your opponent's face. You can Song of Totenzan to make 20 Hasty Rats and kill your opponent with a huge Plague of Rats. So I think there could be a cool combo deck that takes advantage of just how the math of this lines up with X spells. You could do the same thing with Nyxbloom Ancient, but it just died too often. So maybe the resilience of being an enchantment will let us make a really cool combo, one-shot kill, big X spell deck in Standard. So Virtue of Strength, I still think it might be the weakest of the virtues, but the virtue cycle, in my opinion, is very strong. So even the weakest of the bunch is still a really cool card. So if you're a mono green decking commander or want to pull off some sweet Jenkins standard, keep this one in mind because triple mana can do some ridiculous things. We also got a couple of rare blue adventure creatures. First up, Twinning Twins. So Twinning Twins, spell side, 1 and a white instant, exile target non-token creature, return it to the battlefield under its owner's control at the beginning of the next end step. So 2 mana flicker effect. Creature side, 4 mana 4/4 blue fairy wizard with flying vigilance and ward 1. So this card I think is actually weirdly power creepy. We'll see if it's enough power creepy to actually compete in standard, but I think this card might actually be good. So if you think about what this card is, it's essentially a long road home and then a super hugely upgraded Sarah Sphinx, which is actually a color shifted Sarah Angel. So power creeping multiple iconic cards out of the game. And the thing I love about this card is the flexibility. Effects like long road home are really tough to play in most decks because even though they're super useful in certain situations, sometimes they just get stuck in your hand. That's not going to happen with Twinning Twins. With Twinning Twins, you get a on curve 4/4 flying vigilant ward 1, and then you also get the spell effect tack on. Also worth mentioning with this card, flying and vigilance is really new and weird in blue. I'm pretty sure there's only like 5 blue flying vigilant creatures, and most of them have been printed in like the last year. So this is by far the best of them, and I think it's actually a pretty strong effect. Blue is one of the best flying colors, and having this big flyer that can get in for some damage and be back on defense seems really nice. So the first thing I thought of when I saw this card was actually Touch the Spirit Realm. And I know these cards are super different. Touch the Spirit Realm's a removal spell that's also a 2 mana channel flicker effect, but the power of Touch the Spirit Realm is its flexibility. It's an okay removal spell that also can save your creature from a removal spell, and I see the same thing in Twinning Twins. Twinning Twins, you get a pretty decent, actually kind of power creepy above the curve creature, and you also get this ability to save your creature. Would I play either half of these cards on its own in my main deck? Probably not, but when you mash them both together, that's a really powerful effect, just like Touch the Spirit Realms, because there are certainly times when I'm playing Touch the Spirit Realm to be a removal spell, but then flickering my Elish Norn or something just wins me the game. So your opponent goes to like cut down or go for the throat or Wandering Emperor, and you just blink your thing and keep it alive, and then later in the game you get a pretty good flyer that actually tangles really well with many of the most popular flyers in standard, like Rafine and Chromos Seed Shark and Archangel Aras, Sarah Paragon. Twinning Twins gets through all of them. And speaking of Rafine, Ward 1 doesn't sound like much, but we've seen on Rafine that Ward 1 is actually like kind of an annoyance. It's not hexproof by any stretch. Your opponent can still kill your thing if they want to, but even that little bit extra really throws off the removal curve, so it does do something. So I actually really like this card. My only question is, where does it fit? I know where I'm gonna put it, which is gonna be in all the Panharmonicon deck with Elish Norn and Virtue of Knowledge, and then you have Twinning Twins, which can be one of your finishers, and it can also just be in the deck to like blink your Spirited Companion, blink your Lauren, save your Elish Norn from a removal spell to keep it on the battlefield and keep the value train running. So that's the first deck I'm building with this card, but I think this could actually just be a very competitive card in standard. But I actually think there's an even better blue adventure creature that's coming in Wilds of Eldraine for blue decks in standard in Horned Loch-Whale. So this card actually kind of blew my mind. So its creature side is kind of meh. 6 mana 6/6, flash ward 2, enters the battlefield tapped unless it's your turn, it's a whale. So, I mean, it's fine. Obviously a 6 mana 6/6 with ward, you're not going to complain about that. The spell side is what really surprised me. So 1 in a blue instant, the owner of target attacking creature you don't control puts it on the top or bottom of their library. And I think this is just one of the best mono blue removal spells that we've seen. For comparison, it's kind of like a blue Condemn or an Azorius Charm or a Warrant, but the thing is, the only effect I found like this in mono blue that's kind of comparable is Whisk Away, and that's 3 mana. That 1 mana discount is super huge. I think that moves you from janky draft card to legit constructed playable, especially since this removal spell is attached to a 6/6 ward 2 flash finisher in the late game. So I think this could be a staple level removal spell in standard. In the early game, it deals with any attacking creature efficiently, could make your opponent skip a draw if they put it back on the top of their deck, and then later in the game you get this big beater to close out the game. The creature side, I guess technically it's a power creep Visitrix, but honestly it's not super exciting. It's very awkward because Flash and ET being tapped on your opponent's turn kind of defeats a lot of the purpose of Flash. If you think of like Hullbreak Horror, a big part of its power is your opponent attacks you and you just flash in your Hullbreak Horror and you eat whatever they attacked you with, and you're pretty happy about that. Horned Loch-Whale is never going to be able to do that because it's ET being tapped if you play it during your opponent's turn, so it's not going to be this surprise 2-for-1 eat your attacker threat, but I think that's fine. It still lets you leave your mana up, and the kind of decks that are going to want this are control decks, and we have many of them in Standard. If you look at the Standard meta, best deck in the format, Dimir midrange with a bunch of instant speed stuff, make disappears, fairy masterminds, instant speed removal. Second best deck, control, most commonly Esper control with Wandering Emperors and Memory Deluge, also getting Ice out now. So I imagine that Horned Loch-Whale just fits perfectly in these decks. If you're a deck that's trying to leave up your mana all the time, this is just a perfect inclusion. You can use the removal spell early while you're also leaving up a make disappear or go for the throat. And then later in the game, you can leave up your Memory Deluge, your Wandering Emperor, or just flash in your whale and start beating down for 6. So I think this looks to me like a new control and mid-rangey style staple for Standard. Yeah, the creature is not super exciting, but the spell's good enough that I don't think it matters. I even think this could have a chance in Pioneer. Pioneer control decks occasionally play Azorius Charm, and I feel like this could serve a similar purpose. That 2-mana removal spell that draws you a card, except the card you're drawing is the 6/6 Flash Ward 2 Whale, and it's actually a fast clock to finish out the game. If you look at some of the Pioneer control decks, their finishing clock is really slow. It's like Wandering Emperor slow. This just comes down after you gain control of the game, deal with all your opponent's stuff, and closes out the game in like 3-ish turns. So I think Horned Loch-Whale, it might look a little bit janky, but when you consider just how strong that removal spell is and how big a 6/6 is, I actually think this card could have a big impact at 60 card formats. As far as lower rarity cards, only one we're going to talk about individually, but the whole set is out. You can find it on MTGPreviews.com, sort it, filter it, all that good stuff. But the card I want to mention is Quick Study, because a lot of people have been talking about this card. 2 and a blue, instant, draw 2 cards. So this is a card that a lot of people have been discussing in a bunch of different ways. If you're a relatively newish Magic player, this is like a power creep divination, because it's a divination that's instant speed. If you're a somewhat older Magic player, it's a power crept inspiration because it's an inspiration that costs 1 less mana. If you're a super old school boomer Magic player, it's just a bad ancestral recall. But still, drawing 2 for 3 mana instant speed is intriguing. It's been a while since we've seen divination be playable. Probably like 10 years ago, this was like a legit Pro Tour 4 of style card in control decks. Does being an instant change that? We're gonna have to wait and see. But if you're in the market for drawing 2 for 3 mana, this card is the new best version of it. So move over, divinations, inspirations, here comes Quick Study. I also want to mention a couple quick things about the Commander precons. So we got the full Commander precon list, and you can find all the videos covering them over on the MTGGoldfish Commander channel, but we got the full deck list, and some of the reprints are pretty good. I actually think these decks are surprisingly solid. So the first deck, there's only 2, is Selesnya Roll Auras. And this deck I just checked on Amazon is selling for around $40. So in your $40 deck, you get Hall of Heliod's Generosity, and this is just reprints, doesn't count any of the new cards. Hall of Heliod's Generosity, the big winner, that's like a $10 rare. And then there's a bunch of like $5 or $6 cards. Daybreak Coronet, Mantle of the Ancients, Retether, Umbra Mystic, Bear Umbra. So when you add all this together, plus you get a bunch of new cards, some of them are valuable, plus a bunch other, $1, $2 cards. For $40, it actually seems like a pretty reasonable deal, especially compared to the Commander Masters precons that were just so expensive. I think these offer way more value. And then the second deck is a Fairy Tribal deck, and this one also has some good reprints. The big winner here is Brazen Borrower, $10 modern staple, Pioneer staple, but like Glen of Lender Archmage, Scion of Unar, like $8, Kindred Dominant Secluded Glen, like $5 or $6. The only problem with the Fairy deck is it's selling for like $50, so it's a little bit more expensive. I guess people must like fairies, but still seems like a pretty fine deal. So those are the reprints in the Commander decks. Finally today, we got the rest of the Enchanted Tale. So Waste Not coming as an Enchanted Tale with some pretty sweet art. This one's already on Arena, but I don't know what all those eyeballs are doing. The art's pretty intriguing, though. We also got Wizards saving some of the best for last. Shared Animosity, pretty sweet card, really good in tribal decks. We'll see playing Historic Brawl at a minimum. Could see playing some Goblin decks in Historic. And then another big hitter in Primal Vigor, which is basically doubling season, but it affects everyone instead of just you, which is like a $30 card. And I gotta give Wizards a ton of credit. These Enchanted Tales, I think it's the best special slot cards we've seen so far. We've had like Mystical Archives, Retro Artifacts. These are the best. And we're coming off Commander Master spoiler season, where the conversation was really about two big things. One is, the set's great, but it's too expensive. Two is, why doesn't Wizards print more high-end cards in normally priced products? So we still don't have an answer to why is the set too expensive, but I think Wizards has really answered that last question with this set, because this set, especially the Enchanted Tales, is overflowing with value. So Primal Vigor is $30, but I was looking through these Enchanted Tales. There's 63 altogether. There's a total of 10 of them that are worth $20 or more, with Doubling Season being the biggest at like $60, but Parallel Lives is like $40, Bitter Blossoms like $30, Greater Armancy, Land Tax, Repercussion, Ristic Study is almost $40, Smothering Triumph, Aggravated Assault. These are all legit all-star super high-end cards, and you get one of these, not necessarily Doubling Season, but one of the Enchanted Tales in every single booster pack. Normal $100 draft booster packs, you're going to open one of these. So these are coming in normally priced packs, and even better beyond that, there's 11 more cards that are $10 to $20. Grave Packs, and Kindred Discoveries, and Fire Emancipations, and Polluted Bonds, Oppression, Karmic Justice, Prismatic Open. So Wizards really pulled out all the stops with these reprints, and they're in a normally priced box. And I gotta say, I know buying singles is the way to go, but I do love cracking booster packs, and because of these Enchanted Tales, I'm getting some boxes of Wilds of Eldraine. I completely skipped Commander Masters, it was just too expensive, but these Enchanted Tales are so good, the art's good, the value's good, and they're coming in normally priced boxes that I'm definitely gonna be cracking open some boxes. So shout out to Wizards for actually putting a bunch of really high-end good cards with really awesome new art in a very normally priced set. So anyway, that brings us to the end of Wilds of Eldraine spoilers, not just for the day, but of spoiler season. So the whole set's out. Head over to mtgpreviews.com, look it over, let me know what you think. I gotta say, my hype level is up. I was already excited for this set, but now that I've seen the entire set and seen these awesome Enchanted Tales and seen a ton of really cool cards for Standard, some neat Commander stuff, some stuff that could show up or maybe even break older formats like Modern or Legacy, I am really, really excited for what they're doing in Wilds of Eldraine, and I think they designed this set incredibly well. To me, this feels like a set that is full of really, really powerful cards, but they're cards that mostly go in specific archetypes. They're really, really good in one archetype. So I'm not seeing a lot of Shieldreds, but I'm seeing a lot of cards that I cannot wait to play with. So check out the full set, let me know what you think in the comments, and we'll be back next week with some review videos going over the best cards for various formats. And on Thursday next week, it's early access day over on the Twitch stream, where we get to check out all the new cards with a free full stocked account from Wizards. So check that out on Thursday, see all the new cards in action. So thanks for watching this spoiler season, everyone. I hope you enjoyed it, and I will talk to you soon. Looking for even more magic? Well, you can check out yesterday's spoiler video here, or maybe the video where we go through the most watched moments in the history of the MTG Goldfish Twitch stream.